Africa has been kept poor deliberately for hundreds of years. And let me tell you what's going to happen. In the next 100 years, for the First and Second World War, the battlegrounds of capitalism and communism was Europe. The battleground of modern politics will be Africa. The West and the East will come here and they will compete here to have a say in what happens to Africa. And I'm totally against that. Africa needs to be its own voice, and that's why I'm a Pan-Africanist, and I won't sympathize to the left, or to the East, and I won't sympathize to the West, even though I acknowledge the East as...
You look at the West and you think we are living the dream. But let me show you the truth with numbers. In Europe, the richest 10% own about 60% of everything.
So if you are someone here today who thinks that Africa will never catch up with the rest of the world, I want to say that you will be proved wrong.
Africa is the only reason why Western Europeans get to enjoy such a high quality of life, especially for France. They brag about being able to live well even though they don't have to work as hard as Americans, but they omit the fact that all that comfort they enjoy comes off of the back of African resources and labor.
By 2050, 1 in 3 people on this planet will be African, and Europe is absolutely terrified. For 400 years, they told us Africa was the dark continent, poor, helpless, waiting to be saved. But here's what they never mentioned in their history books, that poverty, it wasn't an accident, it was a policy. Every French mansion, every British estate, every American suburb was built on African soil they never had to pay for. And now the bill is coming due. China's building factories while France is getting kicked out of Mali. Russia's making moves. America is scrambling, and we, the diaspora, are watching the biggest wealth transfer in human history happen in real time. The question is not if Africa will rise, it's whether we'll be on the right side of history when it does, or whether we'll keep believing their bedtime stories about a continent that was never asleep. Guys, I want you to sit down, relax, because this is the story they never wanted you to hear. So guys, let us get into it. I have clips here, let us watch them, and then I will be back to discuss everything with you.
You look at the West and you think we are living the dream. But let me show you the truth with numbers. In Europe, the richest 10% own about 60% of everything. In the United States, the top 1% alone hold almost a third of all wealth. And the bottom half together, they own just 2%. Now look at Africa. The richest 1%, just 1 in 100, own about half of everything. In South Africa, the top 10% control more than 80% of the country's wealth. Do you see the pattern so far? It's not you against us. It's all of us beneath the same pyramid. Yes, there are differences. Here in the West, poverty is hidden behind clean streets and credit cards. People live in houses that belong to the banks, drive cars that belong to finance companies, and buy food on debt. I know it looks like comfort. It isn't, and it's actually control. In Africa, inequality is even more visible. The mansions of the few stand out against the struggles of the many. But the design is the same. A tiny elite holding everything while the majority carry the weight. We are actually more alike than you think. You are told that we are rich, but most of us are drowning in debt, stress, poison, food, and illusions. And we are told you are poor, but your lands are rich, your spirit is strong, and still the same sharks feed on you. So let's be clear. The problem is not that Africans lack or that Westerners have. The problem is that everywhere, the wealth of nations is captured by the few, while the many are told stories to keep them divided. So, you think we are your enemy? We were told you are ours. But the truth is actually simpler than that. We are all being lied to. And as long as we believe the lie, the pyramid stands.
And unlike many countries in the West, including Britain, Africa is not saddled with debt. The British debt is 87% of the British GDP, while the African debt is only 9% of their GDP. All but 2 countries in Africa could pay off their debt within 1 year. So the potential is already there, and the growth is already beginning. Even now, Africa is the continent in the world with the fastest economic growth. The GDP per capita of sub-Saharan Africa is expected to rise by 800% from 2020 to 2050. Anyone who doubts that Africa can make quick economic progress like this should look at the economic history of the US. In 1977, the US economy was the same size as the African economy is today. And since then, the American economy has grown by a massive $18.419 trillion. And with Africa having more natural resources than the US, its progress in the next 40 years could be even more spectacular. So if you are someone here today who thinks that Africa will never catch up with the rest of the world, I want to say that you will be proved wrong. With its mammoth population, massive potential, and amazing stores of resources, within your lifetime, Africa will become an economic superpower. Thank you.
Africa is the only reason why Western Europeans get to enjoy such a high quality of life, especially for France. They brag about being able to live well even though they don't have to work as hard as Americans, but they omit the fact that all that comfort they enjoy comes off of the back of African resources and labor. England, Portugal, Germany, Belgium, Italy, and France all made a massive scramble for Africa in the 1880s, and France by far still has their foot in their old colonial ways. Even though these African nations have declared their independence, France and a couple other countries are still exploiting them, and they have given nothing in return to these African nations. They have built very little in infrastructure and construction. They have given next to nothing compared to how much they have taken to support their ways. Out of the 8 African coups that have happened since 2020, 7 of them were from French colonies. The French do not know how to build, they do not know how to innovate, they do not know how to grow democracy in any part of the world, which is why for the past 60, 70 years, they have just had French puppets that were ruling these African countries that finally got sick of how they were being treated. China has only taken an interest in Africa for 30 or 40 years, yet they have built more industry and infrastructure than all of the other European countries combined. So of course, the African nations are going to have a much more favorable disposition towards China since they are the ones who are actually building factories, roads, bridges, hospitals. China is actually divesting a lot of their own resources to make this possible. And you guys know how I feel about a lot of Chinese policy, but they did hit the nail on the mark when it comes to Africa. It is pretty clear that Russia's Wagner forces have had a lot to do with the coups that have taken place in Gabon, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And even though the Russians aren't trying to actually help anyone, I believe they are trying to foment chaos and destabilize a lot of positions in the West. This can be an overall good thing for Central Africa. Even though the Russians' goal is to create a lot of instability for the West, this instability can spread to a lot of other African countries, and that can actually hurt a lot of China's positions there. Make no mistake, despite what you're seeing in the media, the US will find a way to exploit whatever is happening in Africa. At first, they seemed that they were very pro taking down the Niger coup, and now they've kind of backed off and they said that they are going to respect the current government. No, a lot of these African nations don't have a favorable viewing of the United States. The US will always find a way to profit off of whatever instability is caused. If there is going to be a disruption in the energy supply, I will bet you that the US will make money selling its liquid natural gas and oil. If there is going to be widespread war, the US is going to make a lot of money selling its weapons. I would not put it past the United States interests to have their cake and eat it too. They may be happy about China building all of this infrastructure because that means the US doesn't have to. It means the US doesn't have to invest in anything to make Africa more prosperous and rich, but they can reap all of the benefits for when that actually happens. In my opinion, I think that every Western interest should be kicked out of every African country and then reintroduced as a potential trading partner among peers with equal standing, instead of these African nations having to deal with the West like guaranteed exploiters.
Into in today's world. Okay, I'm going to redefine the term industry. Africa. Here's the story. Follow me on this. 9 of the 20 fastest growing economies in the world are going to be in Africa in 2025. Everybody's overlooking it. Only 0.5% of the world's private equity and venture capital is going into Africa, despite the fact that it's going to be the only continent with a growing population. A marketplace is all about consumers and producers instead of people on the tail end of life that are draining money out of an economy. Africa has a vibrancy.
The best industry somebody can get into in today's world.
Okay, I'm going to redefine the term industry. Africa. Here's
Western media loves portraying Africa as a place that is hopelessly impoverished and always prone to conflict. And while there are certainly issues, I believe that Africa is the future. Let me explain. The first thing you have to understand is just how many Africans there are. 30 years ago, there was roughly as many people living in Europe as there was in Africa. But now there are now 3 times as many Africans compared to Europe, and in 20 years there will actually be 4 times as many. What this means economically is that the average African only needs an economic output that's 1/4 of that of a European in order for the African economy to be larger than Europe. And I think this is super impressive, especially given the disgusting role that Europe has played in Africa through colonization and empire. It's beautiful to see Africa having the potential to overtake Europe. The second thing you also need to understand is for a long time period, it was really just the Western countries that were able to dominate the world economically, politically, and through empire. But now in the last 20 years, we've seen the rise of many economies such as China, India, Russia, Turkey, etc. And what this means is all these countries are competing against each other. And if an African state doesn't like the West, they can just kick them out and bring in a different country in. And if they don't like that country, they can kick them out and bring another country in. So unsurprisingly, for instance, we're actually seeing a number of African countries that are, cutting off relations with European powers and even evicting their military. And because of this, you have to understand that the third factor I want to talk about is we're now at a point where a lot of the fastest growing countries economically in the world are in Africa. According to the most recent figures for this year, 6 of the fastest growing economies are now in that continent. And while I know there's certainly many issues in many other countries in Africa, it's very inspiring to see this happen. We saw this previously with Asia, and that continues to a partial degree with, of course, the rise of China, and we could be very soon seeing that also in Africa as well. But the fourth, and I think the most important thing, is while there's all these factors going on, nothing can be achieved without the will of the people. And certainly we're seeing in Africa a bunch of revolutions are happening that is leading to the kicking out of European imperialists and the collective will of African people. In Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, there have been revolutions where now the revolutionaries hold control. They are, for instance, creating factories, growth, economic opportunities for the common people, no longer just serving the foreign powers. And this is really what's going to take off Africa, is if that happens, then it's completely unstoppable.
People in West Africa are starting to live better than people in the Western world. Now, I'm not talking about everybody, but I'm talking about if you're well-to-do, if you're doing pretty good in your life, it's better to be doing really well in Africa than it is to be in America. Now, I'm currently in America, and it's like a little bit of a culture shock coming back from Africa, because when you come here, you're around people who, on paper, they're very successful, rich, and all that. But all these people are drowning in debt. They got a nice car, but they don't own it. They've got a lease on it. They may say that they own a house, but they kind of do, but they have a huge mortgage on it. But in Africa, people own everything outright. And what does this lead to, like, in day-to-day life? Well, when you know someone who's well-to-do in Africa, they're a lot more relaxed. They feel like they can go on trips with you. They're a lot more generous. People here, even though they may have a lot of money on paper in America, the second they let their foot off the gas, the second they stop hustling, those bills will catch up on them really quick. And it shows like kind of why I feel West Africa is the future, because here people are putting up an appearance of being rich, well-to-do, but it's fueled by debt, and it's fueled by them working 2 jobs. Husband and wife are both working high-paying jobs, 50 hours a week each, and doing all of that to just create this facade. Whereas in West Africa, once these guys have made it, they're living good lives. They're having that balance in life, and they're not killing themselves. So I think long-term, who am I betting on? I'm betting on the lifestyle of West Africa.
Look, I need you to understand something that's going on, that's going to sound absolutely wild. Africa is about to become the richest continent on earth. Not might become, not could become, but it will become. And the people who have been eating off Africa's plate for the last 4 centuries, they can see it coming. That's why they are panicking. I'm not talking about some distant hypothetical future. I'm talking about our lifetime. Within the next 25 years, in 2050, the African economy is projected to surpass Europe's. Sub-Saharan Africa's GDP per capita is expected to rise by 800% between 2020 and 2050. 9 of the world's 21st growing economies is African right now. But before you think this is some Wakanda fantasy, let me take you back, because you cannot understand where Africa is going without understanding where it's been, and more importantly, who it's been eating. Now, my grandfather grew up during the colonial period. He used to tell me something that haunted me until the day he died. He said, "Son, our land is rich, but our people are poor. How does that happen?" He never got a satisfying answer, but I do. So do you, because if you're honest about history, let me tell you something. For hundreds of years, not decades, hundreds of years, Africa has been deliberately kept poor. Not because Africans could not build, not because we lacked our resources. Africa has more natural resources than the United States, more than Europe. We are talking about gold, diamonds, cobalt, lithium, uranium, oil, timber, agricultural land that could feed the entire planet twice over. So why did Paris look like paradise while Kinshasa looked like chaos? Simply economics, exploitation. Every French mansion, every luxury car on the Champs-Élysées, every comfortable European retirement, it all came from African labor and African resources that were never paid for. France literally forced 14 African countries to deposit their national reserves into French banks and pay colonial taxes after independence. 60 to 70 years of puppet governments that served European interest while their own people starved. But here's where it gets personal for us on the continent and in the diaspora. You know why our parents and grandparents had to leave? Because the West made sure there was nothing to stay for in Africa. They extracted everything, the resources, the opportunity, the hope, and when our families tried to build something, they found the game was rigged from the start. But there is something that is changing, and it's not subtle. Since COVID, that is 2020, there have been 8 major coups in Africa. 7 of them in former French colonies. We're talking about Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, Gabon. These are not just random, these are revolutions. The people are literally kicking out the old colonial powers and their puppets. They say enough is enough. And here's where the West nightmare begins. Africa has options now. China has built more infrastructure in Africa in the last 30 years than all European countries combined. We have roads in Africa, bridges, hospitals, factories, real development, not loans with impossible conditions, not military bases disguised as aid. There is actual construction. Do not get it twisted, guys. I'm not saying China is a savior, but what China represents is choice. For the first time in modern history, African nations can say to France, "You're not serving our interests. Leave." And then turn to China, Turkey, India, Russia, and say, "Let's talk business." We can sit down. That's leverage, and that is power. So the geopolitical chessboard has been flipped. Africa is no longer just a resource to exploit. It is a partner to compete for. And that competition, that's what gives African nations negotiating power they haven't had since before colonization. Now, here's where this gets complicated for those of us in the diaspora. And those who live in the diaspora, you left your parents left because you were told Africa was poor. You chased the Western dream. You believed the story that success meant making out of Africa, not making it in Africa. I know Jamaicans, Nigerians, Ghanaians, Congolese, Kenyans, brilliant people who would never consider moving back because they have internalized the narrative that Africa equals to suffering. They think that we people who are in Africa are suffering. But what happens when that narrative flips? In 20 years to come, there will be 4 times as many Africans as Europeans. 70% of sub-Saharan Africa is under 30 years old right now. That's not demographic crisis, that's a demographic dividend. A young, hungry, innovative population with access to technology and global markets. Sub-Saharan Africa is already the 3rd fastest growing crypto market in the world. I do crypto myself, and I love it. But meanwhile, what's happening in the West right now? There is debt. Britain's national debt is at 87% of its GDP. Americans drowning in it. Aging populations, declining birth rates, infrastructure crumbling. The American dream is on life support, and everybody knows it. So here's my question to the diaspora. What are you going to do when the opportunity is back home? Because I've seen a couple of Black Americans coming back home. Lagos offers better opportunities than London. Accra has more innovation than Atlanta as we speak. When your cousins who stayed are living better than you are. But, and this is crucial, Africa's rise is not guaranteed, because the same forces that kept Africa poor for 400 years are still at play. The richest 1% in Africa own half of everything. In South Africa, the top 10% control over 80% of the wealth. The pyramid didn't disappear, it just got new players at the top. See, the real enemy is not geography. It's not even colonialism as a historical event. It's the system. The economic pyramid, where a tiny elite holds everything while the masses fight over crumbs. And the elite, they keep us divided with stories. Tribe against tribe, nation against nation, diaspora against homeland. They say you're too Western now, they abandoned us, you don't understand the struggle, they're stuck in the past. You know, these divisions are profitable for people who don't want Africa to rise, because a united Africa with its diaspora bringing back capital, knowledge and connections will be unstoppable. So the West is not afraid of African poverty. They have managed that for centuries, and that's a no-brainer. They're afraid of African prosperity. They are afraid of what happens when a continent with 1.4 billion people and unlimited resources starts calling its own shots, right? So here's my final takeaway. Africa is rising, whether we participate or not. The factories are being built. The infrastructure is going up. The debt is manageable. African debt is only 9% of its GDP, meaning almost every African nation could pay it off within a year. But the question for us, the Bantu merchants, my people, the diaspora, the ones who've been watching from the outside, is this: will we be part of the solution, or will we keep believing the lie that Africa is a charity case? Because here's the truth they don't want you to know. Africa doesn't need to be saved. It needs to be freed. Freed from puppet governments, freed from exploitative trade deals, freed from psychological colonization that makes us believe our homeland, our motherland, is cursed. The wealth transfer is happening. By 2050, African economies will rival Europe's. The only question is whether that wealth will be controlled by the people or captured by the same old elite. African faces colonial practices. Your move is our move, the diaspora's move, all right? We can keep sending remittances and calling it a day, or we can send knowledge, we can send capital, we can send connections and demand accountability. We can build businesses that employ communities, not just exploit them. We can invest in education, we can invest in technology and governance that serves the people. Africa's revenge is not violence, it's prosperity. It's providing every colonial lie wrong. It's building the future they said was impossible. And the best part of it is we get to be part of it if we choose to be. The continent is calling. So, are you answering? This is the Bantu Merchant. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. Like, share, comment, and subscribe.